Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's webinar, Introducing CQI-34, a game changer for embedded software systems. Your presenter today is Greg Gruska. Greg, Omnex champion of APQP, PPAP, FMEA, ISO 6262, Lean Six Sigma, is a fellow of ASQ with deep expertise in systems engineering and reliability. He formerly led quality engineering at GM and has consulted globally on quality product development, failures, and customer satisfaction. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat box. We'll address as many as possible. We also kindly ask all participants to complete the survey afterward. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you like a PDF copy of the presentation, please contact us at webinars@omnex.com. Now, without further ado, please welcome Greg.
Make sure that I am on there. You can hear me. You should be also able to see me. So let me share. All right, and let me get this to be full blown. Okay, so you should see my software or the first slide. If you don't, let me know about that.
Greg, we can't see your presentation.
You cannot see my presentation. No. Okay, so let me break out of that. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. For some reason, I can't see it. All right. I can go ahead. You can see, is it a full screen or is it a partial screen?
It's like partial. You're going to have to put it in slideshow mode.
Thought I had it in slideshow. Okay. Now it's in slideshow mode? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so this is the CQI-34. CQI is a document which was created by under the auspices of AIG, the Automotive Industry Action Group. And it's affectionately known as SAAP, software approval process. So this is getting into it from a motivation standpoint. Why was this even created? And the primary reason is back in the early aughts, the organizations who were developing functional safety of electrical electronics realized that there needed to be something specific. So they developed 26262. And that now is pretty much a requirement within the automotive industry. The thing is that the use of embedded software is now part of, or has been part of, IATF, International Automotive Task Force 16949. The question is, how do we approve software as a standalone or embedded product and still address the need for integration with other components? So there has not been anything formal on that. So it was decided that there is a need to approve and change management needed to be addressed. So the use of embedded software is in multiple standards and documents. There is ASPICE. ASPICE is originally the software process improvement and capability determination. That's what SPCE stands for, SPICE. And then automotive is that it is a subset of the big SPICE standard that was focused on by the automotive industry. It is an industry requirement on it. And originally it was pure software. However, last year they came up with version 4, which includes other domains. So it does include hardware. It does include machine language. It does include cybersecurity. So it has additions for ASPICE for these other domains on that. So besides ASPICE, which was pure software, we have 26262, which is an international standard for functional safety of electronic items. It's been around since 2011. It has recently been updated in 2018, and currently it is being updated once again. It's probably not for another couple of years that before the final review comes out. And then recently, one of the things that has gotten a lot of notoriety is 21434, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has been getting a lot of notice simply because there are people hacking into the electronic items, computerized items, and so they are now getting into the vehicles. So we have that. So cybersecurity deals with the use of embedded software. And there are customer-specific requirements that are not officially standards, but if you want to sell to that particular customer, you have to satisfy their requirements. Now, as it turns out, CQI-34 is a customer-specific requirement. It is not a standard. It is written as a guideline. You can follow it. It's got good advice to do, regardless of whether or not your customer says you have to do it. But there are some customers that are starting to go into and asking about the that you satisfy the CQI-34. So these standards, these in here, introduce new requirements on how a product or the process that produces that product is going to be improved. Again, ASPICE was first of all software process improvement. And so it looked at different capability levels. And now it is expanded to hardware as well as machine language and cybersecurity. The two ISOs are definitely oriented towards how the product is approved. And functional safety, they include a requirement for a safety case, which you have to show that it's reasonably to assume there are no unreasonable risks. So as OEMs and suppliers address their specific needs, we're seeing numerous variation of the approval process. So when AIG was first deciding, do they spend the time and effort, get people involved from the industry to develop this, they looked at the context. What is the context of these products? And we're seeing that electrical vehicle and embedded software is there. In fact, it is estimated that in a couple of years, by 2030, half of the car's cost will be because of electronic, or software components. It was noted that various customer-specific requirements and other software approval processes were materializing. However, there's variation across the different members. And it's not that they wanted the difference in the final output, it's that the specific input or the details were different. It is kind of the same motivation why 16949 got created in the first place. Because back in the late 80s, early 90s, there were multiple quality standards. And so different companies, for example, Ford, GM, and Chrysler, all had their own quality basis. And in Europe, you had the European OEMs had their own, Volkswagen, Mercedes, Opel, and the rest. So it was a concern that if the trend continued, it would cost, we would have dozens of approval processes, none of them exactly the same, but still costing time and money, trying to come up with the rationale or combine them in different manners. They looked at the rest of the industry and they found that for mechanical, we have one production part approval process. And so the question is, well, why can't that be expanded to include software? So either as a separate or part of it. Well, since PPAP is owned by the task force, they couldn't go in there and modify that. It would be the task force that would have to do it. So AIG said, well, let's do something that is similar to it, parallel to it. So the business case was developed, approved, and to address this. So the deliverable details is the main deliverable is a industry guidance manual. Again, it's not a standard, it's a guidance manual. It takes on its authority by the customer saying, I want you to follow this, or you must submit a SAAP on there. So it details the process and methodologies for the quality assurance of software development, including the process of approval of software, either standalone or part of an overall part approval process. The intention is to provide guidance on industry preferred methods of software development assessment. And they had, this is from the different cases. This was approved in 2022. It says recommended manufacturing controls to be included in the part control plan to assure version control and successful flash of software to hardware. So we're still looking at embedded software. And they did have members from the different suppliers in OEM. This is just a cross section of the people that were involved in developing it. Now, again, the main document that is governing CQI-34 is IATF 16949, and specifically the clauses A323 and A4231. Now you can tell these are from the IATF editions because they've got 4 and 5 dots on there. So the organization shall use a process for quality assurance for their products with internally developed embedded software. So that is what the IATF said. The software development assessment methodology must be utilized to assess the process, development process. And so some of this is where it comes up into ASPICE. ASPICE is a performance, and actually ASPICE addresses this last one. Next one is based upon risk and potential impact, the organization shall retain documented information of a software development capability self-assessment, which is the original purpose of ASPICE. And it has to extend to external suppliers. So it just doesn't stop after the first tier or the second tier, so forth. The organization shall include software development within scope of their internal audit program. Internal audit program is part of IATF. It's also part of 26262 and 21434. And so essentially it reinforces the fact that software has to be part of that. And then quality assurance can and does involve the application of many standards. So the question that came up, how do we PPAP software? Cannot apply it directly just because of the very nature of it. So they looked at the entire system and they recognized that the system that they were looking at really was not just at one level. It actually goes all the way down, that the software is not typically developed at the top levels of the supply chain, but more towards the bottom level. And it could come up either one of these also. Now, one thing that is common among the other standards, and in one sense, it is being supported by APQP, is the V model of development. Now, especially those of you who are in software, a lot of people in software look at the V model as the waterfall example. We're looking at the V model as the system engineering approach, not as a specific application. So the V model says that we start off with the customer's requirements. So everything comes up with the customer's requirements, and then we start going down the left side of the V, getting more details into the product that we are producing, or service, or software, until we get down to the very bottom where we have our detailed design. And then we go upward on the right side. And the right side deals primarily with testing. So we get the individual components, the parts and the unit software, and then we put them together. And then we have to verify that those work together. And then we take those that software modules, we put them together into subsystems, and we put them together into the system. And then finally, we put the hardware and the software together, and we get into the item. So we do the item integration. And then finally, we do our validation. Now, everything on this side and on this side, except this top one, is verification. Validation, we wait until we get into the final grouping. So the V model shows the requirements flowing down and the testing flowing up. And the testing is of what was identified on the immediate left. So in here, we look at each of the individual components. But in here, we're looking at the subsystems or the systems. And it is important that the testing matches the level of requirements. So we have this kind of model where we can flow down the requirements and then flow up the testing. And we talk about traceability. Traceability is discussed in the new APQP version 3, but it is a lot control traceability. Here we're talking about functional traceability. We're looking between the linkage between the requirements up on top and the corresponding work products that go all the way out to the actual testing and actually into production, although the V model is only in the development, not into the testing, or not into the production realm of it. All right. And so notice from a verification standpoint, we not only do immediately up and down, we also will jump over some of them that are in there. Now, as another way to explain this is that instead of doing it as a V model, although because we don't have any testing in here, we're only on the left side. So when we are doing a design, we typically think in terms of the use case view. Then we have the functional view, and then finally the practical view. And so we start off at the use view, and at the very beginning, we are looking at the item. What is going to go inside the vehicle? What are the functionality requirements inside the vehicle? And then in order to do that, we have to know that's what we're going to do, but we need to know how we're going to do it. In order to determine how, we've got to get into the realization, and then that goes into the next level on the what's. So the how at this level becomes the what's at this level. And so then each of these what's need to have the hows. So this is what we have, the cascading of requirements, until at the very end, we have our unit requirements, our parts or our unit software. And so this is the essentially the V model coming down. One thing that this has done in the past 10 years is getting the design teams to start realizing that when somebody gives them a requirement up on top, they cannot immediately jump down to the bottom. If they jump down to the bottom, they're going to miss, one is they're going to miss all the traceability, but two, they're going to miss a lot of opportunities. I remember working with a organization that wanted to come up with a brake management system. And so was wanting to do the electronic component that would control brakes. And so they were up on here talking about what they were going to do for the brake control system. And some of the design engineers immediately start talking about hydraulic brakes and how you control hydraulic brakes. And the project manager stopped them after a very short discussion and said, who said that we're only going to do this for hydraulic brakes? There are other braking mechanisms that we can use. If nothing else, we can always use electrical brakes. And so it got the people to come away from the detail and start looking at and tracing it down through the left side of the V in order we can see how the requirements flow down. So we have that as part of the V model, is to do that. Now, this is ASPICE. This is version 4 of ASPICE. And in here, you see the overall system V. This is systems engineering development. So in here, we get the customer requirements. We come down to what are the system requirements. And then that is passed on to hardware and software. Hardware and software have their own V's. Hardware in here and software in here. And then once they get up to the top here, then it goes back up into the systems. And so we have the systems V. Now, this is the overall V's, but we have supporting activities. We got project management. We've got different support activities. And It does include the different aspects of the design V model itself. So this is the individual processes that is expected by ASPICE. 26262, functional safety, affectionately known by a lot of people as FUSA. That's typically only in the Western worlds where they talk about that. But in here, we see the overall V. And the overall V includes the concept, systems engineering, hardware, and software, as well as production, as well as support activities. So it includes, with 2018 version, it includes all motor vehicles, except for the small motorcycles, or motor scooters, I should say, that are less than a certain horsepower and speed and that sort of thing. Everything else is in here, which does include things like heavy-duty trucks. And heavy-duty trucks is embedded within here. They got a couple of separate clauses on here. And it does include motorcycles. Motorcycles has enough differences that they put in more detail of what is different. And they put it under a separate part. The functional safety has 12 parts. We take a look at the other standards, and we're used to seeing like ITF has 70 some pages, and ISO 9000 has, I think, 40 some pages. ISO 26262 has over 500 pages. It does not follow the same clause structure that IATF does. Each of these is a separate standard. So there are 12 standards which are part of ISO 26262. Of those, 10 are required. 10 are are they just guidance? 10 and 11, part 10 and part 11 are guidance, and all the rest are required. So consequently, they have it on top like that. Now that does include the V model for software. And so this is consistent with the V model for software that's in ASPICE and the rest. So we have it graphically, it's given as a list, not a V, but it's got the black V over the top of it. We also have a V model for cybersecurity. It's not as detailed because cybersecurity usually doesn't start from the very beginning, but we still have the same. We've got the development on the left side and the testing on the right side. So we have for cybersecurity. Now, the APQP model, and this is version 3. So we see the planning, which was in version 2, only went up to here. We see that planning goes all the way across the entire development cycle. Why is that? Or is that because when we're talking about the V model, we're talking about planning throughout the entire left side. So we keep on making changes. We keep on adding in detail. So we'll keep on planning. So planning goes across the entire. And so we have the product design and development. It's phase 2. Phase 3 is the process design and development. And then we have phase 4, which is the realization or industrialization. We plan in 2 and 3 and execute in 4. Notice that production is not a solid color. It's green and red. That's because, and production is not really part of APQP. Production is governed by IATF. APQP is the development model. So it deals with the design. So all of these are the design of the product, design of the process, and then on 4 is the testing. So 4 goes onto the V model on the right. And then we have the overall feedback. Once we get into production, it comes back into the feedback and then goes into the next iteration. So the first thing they did is come up with, what does this look like if we did it only for software? And here we're doing it for the product. Come on, or it's for the product. So that's the reason why I do product design and development and then process. So if we wanted to do it only for the software, what would we do? Again, planning and requirements go across. We have software design and engineering. Here we have the integration and verification test. So this would be the left side of the V model. This one would be the right side of the V model. And then validation and approval would be the very top of the right side of the V. Then once it gets into production, then we get the feedback, market development, and continual improvement. So it follows, again, the same, the V model, the APQP model as we're doing it. So this is the structure. There is no required structure. You want it to be as similar to PPAP as possible for consistency. You want one forward and general introduction section describing what it is that you're going to be talking about. You want to talk about the general software approval process, the overview, and the flow of information. So you would want to say, this is how we do it. And then it turns out that the SAP, and we do have it on next slide, has 15 process requirements. The same way that PPAP has 18 requirements. Then there has to be customer notification and submission requirements. And the submission requirement is between you and your customer. And then submission levels, what are you going to be submitting? And then you would send it off, you'd get the status, have it come back. Is it approved, interim approval, or rejected? Obviously, if it's rejected, you need to make changes and get it finally approved. And then they talk about record retention and then any kind of appendices that you may want to include. So these are the 15 requirements for SAP. And then these are the 18 PPAP requirements. So obviously there's going to be things in here. We don't really have a capability study. We don't really have the packaging. Don't really have the build event or the we do have a control plan on that. And so in here, we want to have, though, as close as possible between the two. So harmonization and the improvement of the global deliverables per product families that should be coordinated by a global quality organization. So let's get a little closer into those requirements that you can read them at least. So you need to have the software version identification. Now, one thing that it's not required by SAP, but it is required by 26262 is before you release the product to manufacturing, you have to have a signed release. You have to have some agent of the company sign the document, which includes versioning and configuration identification. If you do have any release notes and parameter configuration guidelines, you would need to have those in there. The requirements documentation. So down in here, from here, this is what we're going to be doing. And then down in here, we're getting into how we're doing it. So how did we develop the requirements? And this is also something that's in ASPICE, is the analysis of the requirements so that you can get it down to the next level. So the requirements documentation at the top level, and then the traceability down. The architecture. What is the architecture for your software? Unfortunately, we still, for the people who do manual coding, not all of them are following the rules that they recommend, which is do a flowchart before you do software coding. Not only do they not do that, they bought software that'll create the flowchart after you write the code. Well, we want that architecture ahead of time. And when we are looking at the testing, we want to test the architecture as well as test the individual requirements. And then what are the verification documents? The test results. What did you do? And how is that traced back to the customer requirements? Risk management. What did you do for risk? Did you follow, if it's safety related, did you follow 26262? If it's not safety related, what did you do instead? One of the requirements in PPAP is you do a FMEA. Well, it turns out FMEAs are risk management tools. So did you do a risk analysis for your software? What was the tool you used for that? What were your process assessments? And then if you have it, it relates to you, the functional safety audit and assessment, that is a requirement for 26262. cybersecurity audit and assessment. That's part of 21434. So you just reference that and say, look, we follow this and we have them under these reports. Manufacturing compliance. So how do we know that we are embedding the software properly? And then compliance to field service requirements. A V model. So we're going down and going up. Now, as it turns out, then we go to the application approval, which would be the verification, validation, and then software application, which comes back from the customer. It turns out that if you are doing safety related, one of the requirements that is in 26262 is that you develop a safety case. Now, a safety case, what does the safety case have to have? They got to have the version identification. They got to have release notes. You have the parameter and configuration. You got to have requirements. You got to have architecture, verification, risk management, assessment, audits. So the big difference between the functional safety is that there are only looking at those things that affect functional safety. Whereas in here, we're looking at other performance requirements, not only functional safety, but others. However, that does say that you can overlap, that you can refer one to the other. So as you're going through, whichever one is first as you're going through. So there is not a whole lot. There are some metrics that are part of the checklist that the reference manual does include things that deal with metrics involved with developing the software. And you need to look at the book and open it up. There is no formal submission warrant, unlike PPAP. They do have an example, but it's whatever you and your customer want in the warrant itself. So an implementation checklist. So if you're going to implement CQI-34, these are some of the things you have to, first of all, understand the framework. You got to understand and identify your software products, which of them are going to be covered by it. If your customer doesn't require a submission or doesn't require formal documentation that doesn't say that these are not important. You should do it because it's good, follows the V model. Like all the other requirements, guidelines, and standards that we have, we want a cross-functional team. We want to have together. And in fact, that becomes more real if you're doing other than, or even if you're doing just software. Because functional safety talks about the hardware-software interface document, which describes what is hardware providing to software, what software is providing for hardware. That has to be a joint agreement between all three areas. You need to have the people trained in CQI-34 and really the other standards. The other standards are more complex. You have to align with existing standards. ASPICE and 26262 overlap a lot, but it doesn't mean that if you do one, you've done the other. Again, 26262 is focused on functional safety. ASPICE is looking at the overall performance. So in one sense, it's broader. On the other hand, 26262 has more specific requirements because it is safety related. And then you have between ASPICE now and 21434, you have the cybersecurity aspects of it. So you do have those requirements also. And then obviously we have the overriding standard, the IATF 16949. And in that, by the way, 26262, in order to be compliant to 26262, it says that you have to be compliant to a quality standard. So even in 26262, we have the pointer to IATF. And from IATF, we got it pointing to ASPICE and pointing to 26262 and so forth. You want to conduct internal assessments. The internal assessment, the reason why we're saying assessments, because that's the word is used with ASPICE. And then audits. Audits are the ISO and IATF. So we want to do that internal assessment activities. Then you want to prepare the submission, document and software application submission warrant. And then you'd look at, well, what if you're doing functional safety also, what kind of overlap do you have? In the safety case, you need to identify the product as well as process activities. Well, the same thing is for this. You want the product and the process activities. You need to collaborate with stakeholders. When we're talking about different suppliers, the requirement for the hardware-software interface is it doesn't make a difference whether we have 3 agencies doing individual development of hardware, software, and the integration. You have to have communication between them. And as always, from IATF, we want continual improvement. Continual improvement. And monitoring of the metrics. So I mentioned there are 15 metrics in CQI-34, and you want to update those processes where necessary. Now, as it turns out, CQI-34 is not considered by many people to be a finished goods. There are other things out there that need to be interfaced. For one thing is we have VDA. VDA is the administrator for ASPICE. And VDA has its own standards and guidelines. So how is VDA going to be dealing with this? Regardless of the harmonization, customers may still have specific requirements on it. For example, Ford says they expect DFMEAs for software. Not all the other OEMs do. We got to remember is that PPAP is a standard. It is a customer-specific requirement, whereas CQI-34 is guidance. And unless your customer says, I want you to follow it, you don't even have to spend the money to buy one. Although I would recommend you have at least one so you could see what's going on in the system. So it is a guidance document. Should there be a self-assessment as with other CQIs, or do we leave this to ASPICE and other assessment models? Other CQIs that AIG has developed has their own self-assessment. But ASPICE is also self-assessment. So which should be the case? Should there be a basic set of software quality metrics? They have guidelines in CQI-34, but it is not a requirement. You don't have to go through all those metrics. Now that ASPICE includes hardware and other content, should we address this in the future? Should there be more specific direction for software changes post-approval? Example, over the air. How are you would be handling over the air or flashed at the dealership or flashed in-house? How do you address or should address open source software? 26262 talks about that, and they don't use the word open source. They said that the software used for safety related items has to either one, be developed following 26262 or you have to qualify it. So it's saying that you cannot just go out and get open source software or buy software off the shelf and use it. You have to have some assurance that that software is going to do what it is supposed to be doing. And there'll be other things that are missing. Typically, when you have a new guideline, you have things that are modified. That's kind of the reason that's true for any kind of guideline or standard. So 26262 was developed in 2011, and it was revised in 2018. So we have the two different versions. We have, we're up to version 4 in the FMEA, version 4 in the MSA. However, SPC is still version 2. We don't have that, has not been modified. And then APQP is up to version 4. So we have all of those individual items. Okay, with that, I will entertain questions. I know it's minute to 12, but I will entertain questions. You could put it on the chat. Or you can, I don't know whether you have the capability of turning on. We do have a couple of questions. Okay, we do have one question, and it says type verification. Oh, it's a typo. Evidently, we have a typo in the word verification. So thank you very much. We will clean that up. So we'll get rid of that. We got another question. CQI-34 has forms with questions, and I got to change my glasses. These fonts are way too small for me. Okay, the question is, does CQI have forms in Excel and questions on what to look for? No, it does not. At least it hasn't been yet. I do know that other documents that was released by AIG did have Excel versions of the forms and questions in that, but CQI 34 does not. In fact, in order to get a copy of the example submission, you actually have to buy a hard copy because you cannot get that over the air. You have to get that from the hard copy and then make a copy of it and then feed it into your computer on that. Oh, Nelson was just correcting his own spelling. All right. Okay, any other questions? Okay, if you do, you can um, uh, uh, forward them to Omnex offices and they'll get to me and then we will respond accordingly. And with that, I thank you all for being in attendance, and we will see you at future webinars.